Hello, everyone. Welcome to Subtle Asian Book Club's live show discussion of our May Book of the Month, which is the Stationery Shop. We're so excited to have the author Marjan Kamali here to discuss with us. I'm Alexandra at Twirling Pages.
I'm Tiffany. I read by Tiffany.
And I'm Marjan Kamali. Nice to be here.
Yay, we're so excited to have you here. Would you like to introduce yourself, give a little bit of a blurb of the Stationery Shop, and then also as a quick icebreaker, what has been your favorite quarantine hobby?
Absolutely. So I am Marjan Kamali, and I'm the author of The Stationery Shop. And The Stationery Shop is a love story. It's about two teenagers who meet in 1953 in Iran when they're 17. And they fall madly in love and they're supposed to get married. But on the eve of their wedding, a huge coup d'etat breaks out in the country. And they're separated and basically live 60 years apart, but then are reunited in Massachusetts in 2013. So that's just a quick summary of the book. And one thing that I've been doing during the quarantine that's become a new hobby, it's going to sound a little strange, but it's stretching. I've been doing these morning stretches, which I never ever did before, never pre-quarantine, but it keeps me kind of sane and balanced. I highly recommend stretching.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Taking care of our health as we're staying at home. One of our favorite things about this book is that, like you mentioned, it is set in Iran during a time where there is a lot of political turmoil. So do you want to talk about what was the research process like when writing this book, and what part was the most difficult and what part was the most rewarding?
Sure. You know, I had to do quite a bit of research for this book because my first book, Together Tea, the events that it was based on happened during my own lifetime. So I had some kind of knowledge of the 1979 revolution in Iran. But to go back to 1953 required educating myself. And I would say the most difficult part was really gaining that knowledge. I read a lot of nonfiction books, a lot of newspaper articles. It really was a big learning curve for me to not only understand what happened in 1953, but what preceded it and the ripple effects of that coup d'etat. That was the hardest part. But the most rewarding part of doing the research was I was in a position of privilege because I could reach out to elderly relatives who had lived through the coup. And I did do that. And some of them really opened up to me, not just about 1953, but about their own youth and their high school years. And the absolute most rewarding part of the research was being able to talk to my dad and having him share with me his memories of being an adolescent in Tehran.
We loved your book, as we've said before. So many people were like in tears or just like screaming at the ending, and also just loving how everything wraps up. And one thing that a lot of people have said throughout our book club chat is that this book really brings to light a lot of politics of Iran that we didn't really know too much about. And specifically, it also brings a lot of hope to Tehran during a time of political turmoil. So why was it important for you to really weave this politics into what essentially is a romance story?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wrote the book for the most part during 2015 and 2016, and we were going through an election cycle here in the US, a very contentious, controversial election cycle. And I wanted to, at the same time, I wanted to escape from all the politics, but it's impossible to separate politics, I feel, from fiction. At its core, everything is political. So even though it's a love story and I knew I wanted to focus on the characters and their relationship and their dynamics, the backdrop is this political event that actually had ripple effects for the world, I would say, to this day. And it was a desire of mine to set it in a stationery shop because I love stationery shops, A. And B, the stationery shops in Iran sell books. And I do think books are a refuge from politics. So for Roya, the main character, being in the stationery shop is actually an escape from the divided political country that she's in, or so she thinks.
Yeah, the stationery shop was definitely like an oasis for me and for her just as a reader because seeing it was like, wow, like you can just tell when you hear the door bell ring and then like she steps in and like she's surrounded by not only stationery but books, and then it really helped me understand like her as a character and just all the relationships. An interesting part about reading the reading experience was the socioeconomic diversity between the characters. Why was it important for you to show the interactions of characters within different wealth brackets, especially during the backdrop of the revolutions that took place during this time period?
I think in Iran, like in so many countries in the continent of Asia, there's a huge class divide. I know specifically in Iran, there isn't a caste system the way we are used to hearing about it in India, but there's certainly a class system. And I wanted to explore how being from a quote unquote lower class, being from a poor background where the person is illiterate and uneducated, in that time in Iran would basically constrain them to a very, very limited future. And Bahman's mom is a melon seller's daughter. Her father is uneducated. He works in the bazaar, and she falls in love with this very educated, wealthy boy. And then again, we see the echo of that with Roy and Bahman to a degree. And I wanted to show how these socioeconomic conditions shape people's lives. Often there is no escape, there is no class climbing and getting out of it, especially at that time in that culture.
I also don't know if we've mentioned in the beginning, but we will be going into spoilers for this book club discussion. So if you have not finished the book, please go read it. It's fantastic. You'll love it. You'll be in tears, but don't worry. You can come back to us and we can cry together and just cherish its wonderfulness. But speaking of Bahman's mom, she was a character that I really had to grow to love, or I ended up really growing to love. She was so conflicting in the beginning because you see one side and you're just so frustrated how she's treating Roya, and then you learn about her history and I'm like, oh my god, I'm crying. So moving a little bit away from like the research process into more of like plot and characters questions, the stationery shop follows the perspectives of Roya throughout many, many years. Do you see yourself in her character?
I think so. I mean, she's definitely, when we first meet her, she's 77, and then we go back to her when she's 17. I think as an author, I used to try to guess in my first book, which character am I? Though that one is pretty simple because it's autobiographical. But in general, like I always try to guess which character is my subconscious, drawn to. And the truth is all of them, all of them. So do I see myself in Roya? Yes. Do I see myself in her sister Zari? Yes, there's part of me in that character too. I totally agree with you, Tiffany, about what you said about Bahman's mom, because when I first started writing her, she was, to me too, this sort of archetype of a villain and just a mean mother-in-law type. But then as her backstory developed, I grew too, as a writer, to appreciate how she was shaped by the trauma she'd experienced. So believe it or not, I hate to say this because I know a lot of people are furious with Mrs. Aslan's decisions, but who knows? There's probably part of me in her too, right? I mean, I think in all of them there is.
Yeah. I'm a very character-driven reader, and so when I was reading this book, I was like, I love how complex and multidimensional all the characters are. So even though, like we said, like Bakwan's mom has like some not so great characteristics, like we can really feel for her and understand like where she's coming from and why she's doing the things she is. So it's not like, oh, there's one bad character or there's one good character. But aside from Roya, who is your favorite character to write and who is the most challenging?
My favorite character to write, you're going to be surprised, was actually Bahman's mom, Mrs. Aslan, because in the beginning, in the first draft, she was this very archetypal villain. However, as I wrote her, she kind of took over and she wrote herself. So I really appreciated that. And she became my favorite character to write because she constantly surprised me. I didn't expect her backstory to be as, like you said, complex as it is. I also appreciated being able to explore mental illness through writing her. Because I really think mental illness is on a spectrum. They're the people who are diagnosed and treated and everybody knows they have a condition. And then on the other end, there are those who are suffering from a condition, but they're high functioning, not diagnosed, certainly not treated in Iran at that time, and they cause great harm to themselves and to others. The most difficult character to write was actually Bahman, because I'm not used to writing from the point of view of a male. My first book was just 2 women, and so I really had a hard time getting into his voice. And so you'll notice that in order to do it, I did it in first person. Whenever we hear his point of view, it's through his letters, which is first person.
Oh,
So
that's so interesting.
yeah, it forced me to get close to him.
It's so interesting that you say that he was like the hardest character to write, because he was a character that I just immediately fell in love with when Mr. Bakri was like, he's a boy who's going to change the world. I was like, wow, that sentence really just stuck with me till the very end of the book. Um, this wasn't a question we had like prepared previously, but do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like diving into your book? Your book touches a lot about a lot of deeper topics, such as trigger warnings for like abortion, for mental illness. What was the research process like for that, and what was it like to really dive into these?
It was pretty intense. It was intense as a writer. The topics you mentioned were not part of my plan. So, it is a trigger warning. The abortions that Mrs. Aslan goes through and, basically inflicts upon herself, that first one. A lot of the difficult topics took me by surprise in the first draft. And I used to have pretty emotional days writing this book. You both mentioned at the beginning of our session how, the book makes you cry or made you cry and feel these emotions. I certainly felt them writing it. So there was a time, because I'm actually talking to you literally from the desk where I wrote the book, and there was a time when this entire desk was covered with wadded up tissues that were soaked with my tears, no joke. And sometimes my husband would come and be like, "Are you okay?" Like, just
I'm not okay.
Yeah, I mean, oh my God, certain scenes, I was a bit of a mess. You just have to go through it as a writer. And in the first draft, you really go through it, and then you kind of tidy it up and maybe reorganize things. But some of those issues that you brought up were not planned. But then I knew they belonged in the story, probably because they weren't planned.
Just curious, how long did it take for you to finish this book? And like, obviously, there were probably many iterations of it, but
Yeah, so it took me a year. No, it took me 2.5 years to write the first draft. So I started the first draft in the middle of 2014, and I finished it right before the election of 2016.
Oh.
Yeah, then I took some time off I'm sure you remember post-election, a lot of us were just a bit, we needed a little time. And then I came back to it and I revised it for 1 year. So the whole thing took 3.5 years.
Okay. Yeah. Jumping back to mental illness and stuff, this is also like not pre-planned question, but I know usually in Asian culture and Asian countries, there's a lot of stigma around mental illness.
Mhm.
And you said that much of these topics were not pre-planned, but why was it important for you to talk about these topics, and why was it important for you to keep it in the story? Even though you did mention like, oh, it kind of inserted itself into it.
Well, I think precisely because of what you said. I think in our cultures, there is a stigma. Usually, mental illness, when I was growing up, the way it was addressed was purely through the family, like the family took care of it. If somebody had mental illness or exhibited behaviors that showed they were suffering from some kind of mental condition, it was kept under wraps and the family compensated. And I really was always so, truly, the word is curious. I was always curious. I wanted to know why is, X acting this way and what's going on? But it wasn't really talked about. And with Mrs. Aslan, Bahman, her son, and her husband, they pick up the pieces, right? They take care of it. And the way it's portrayed to the outside world is, you know, she has these moods, it's beyond her control, it's not in her hands, and you don't talk about it. And that's precisely why I wanted to discuss it, particularly within the context of an Eastern culture where these constraints exist. And at the same time, the family, it's not that they don't care, they care a great deal. They're dealing with it the best that they can with, what they have, with the knowledge they have. And it doesn't include kind of Western medicine.
I think that's what makes the story just so it really hits deep, it really does. And getting to see like Batman really care for his mom and also like Mrs. Aslan's husband really care for her too. That was such a touching moment in the story. Um, so one thing we really loved about your book was how all the characters' histories were interconnected, such as Roy and Bahman and then Badri and Ali, so Mrs. Aslan and Mr. Fakri. Was this something you had planned from the start? Or was it something that like came to you as you were writing?
It was a little bit of both. I knew I was focusing obviously on Roy and Bahman, and they were 17 in 1953, and they had their whole love story and all the ups and downs that go in their courtship and their engagement and their final sad separation. But at the back of my mind, I wanted the stationery shop owner to somehow connect to these two teenagers. I wasn't sure how. As I wrote it, the first draft is how I discovered it. And when when Mrs. Aslan took over, she kind of showed me the way. And then I realized it wasn't even like I realized, it was almost like I uncovered this secret that even I didn't know. It's like, oh my God, they're gonna be connected. The stationery shop owner and Batman's mom are gonna be connected. And I was as surprised as anyone else, honestly, the way it all kind of came together. But there was a deep desire on my part to have there be an echo with the story of the stationery shop owner and Mrs. Aslan, and then Roya and Bahman, because so much of this book is the history that you do not know and how it affects the present. Yeah, so.
When you discovered about like Badri and Ali's relationship, did it change anything about Roya and Bachman's relationship when you were writing?
Yeah, it did, because I realized then that I had to justify. So we're allowed spoilers. So we all know Badri does some pretty bad things, and she messes up their relationship forevermore. And I had to somehow justify her doing that. Aside from her mental illness, which I've since been told is actually borderline personality disorder, a psychologist in a book club helped diagnose her for me, which was really helpful. But it all connected, because then we see why she's so adamant to have her son marry up, to have a higher status. It's her insecurity with her own status, which we were talking about, the socioeconomic constraints that it's really hard to break out of, and also her personal heartbreak. Sometimes I feel when you go through a lot of suffering, you want the next generation not to suffer. And sometimes you're like, you know what? I went through it. So she's sadly more of the latter, where she doesn't have the sympathy for them.
I thought that was so interesting because as we're reading, we see a lot of parallels between both like the younger relationship and the older relationship of Ali and Mustafa and Roya. Because I personally thought that like Mizasa would be able to empathize with Roya since they had somewhat of a similar position in terms of like seeing the person they love go marry someone else. I was like, why don't you understand? And also at the end of the book, I was like, darn it, I wish there were like a novella or a sequel because I want to learn more about like all of the hidden history that's not in this book.
Yeah, oh, thank you. I know. I do think it's part of borderline personality disorder to not have empathy. That's actually one of the symptoms. To see the world through your own lens only. So, and to see it in black and white. But it is pretty messy. I agree. I mean, you would think she would have not wanted Roya to suffer what she went through, but
Yeah. But then again, that's also what makes her such an interesting character and why I mean, she's done some terrible things, but then I still love her at the end.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's like a piece of work, right? Like, it's so difficult to love her, and yet you hopefully understand a little bit where she's coming from, knowing what she went through when she was young.
For sure.
Yeah.
We both really loved reading about Roya's family because it was such a stark contrast from like Badri and Bachman and their whole family, from Roya's mother and father and sister, and they all bring a sense of hope and love with their individual uniqueness. Did you see any part of your family in Roya's family?
I did, to a degree. Roya's father is very supportive of his girls being educated and pursuing careers. He's pretty progressive. Um, Luckily, the men in my family are that way. So, my mom's father was always very open minded about women's rights, women's education, women's careers. My own father encouraged my sister and me to live to the best of our potential. There was none of that stereotypical kind of chauvinistic, sexist, uh, evil, quote unquote, Asian man, which annoys me to no end because I do feel it's a stereotype. And so I deliberately wanted to have the father be that way. I also do have a sister, so even though I'm not Roya, she's not Zari, or vice versa, the dynamic of that sibling love where, you're so close, you can almost read each other's minds, and yet, you can annoy each other to no end too. I think I use some of that from my own experience of having a sister.
Yeah, I also have a sister, and I really loved reading Roya and Zari's relationship because I think when you first initially read it, it seems almost like Zari's like jealous or bitter or like not the kindest. And I felt that with my own sister because when I was growing up, I used to fight with her all the time, like, oh, you're so annoying, you're the worst. But then, like, now as you grow older, you realize like that is a form of affection in a weird way. It's like, oh, there's like a really deep underlying love in their relationship, even though on surface level it may seem really cruel. So, yeah, I really love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. No one's gonna be honest with you the way your sister is, right? Like they'll tell it hopefully like it is, and sometimes you need that.
Mhm.
There were also moments where I felt like Zari wasn't the biggest supporter of their relationship, but then as a reader, you're like, "No, I want them to be together, Zari. Why are you so like pessimistic about this?" But again, that's like no one's gonna tell you like it is, like your sister. And I hope that like your close friends also will like tell you if someone they think is like sus that you're dating.
Yeah, you want them to speak up. And Zari always has these like you say, suspicions about Batman. She's very concerned. But I also wanted the reader to maybe suspect her as one of the people who might want to sabotage Roya and Batman's relationship because she is kind of not on Team Batman.
Yeah, I definitely felt that when I was reading it, when there was like when when the initial letters when you find out that the letters are different initially because he doesn't show up, I was like, I feel like she messed with them. This is like halfway through the book. And then towards the end, when you like when Zoya finds out, or not, no, when Roya finds
Yeah.
out, sorry, I like combine their names.
You
When Roya
Yeah, that's a good name.
what? Okay. When Roya finds out, I was like, no, I don't think so. Because prior to that, you see Roya going through like her sorrows because of her first child, and then you see Zari like just flying and moving her family across and not saying anything, and then they still have like I wouldn't say tense relationship, but it's like not surface level affectionate of being like, oh yeah, I love you or whatever, where she's like, oh well, you should do this, and then whatever, like a typical sibling, or not typical, but like how I viewed my sibling relationship, where it's not super openly loving, but through her actions, you can tell, like, she is, like, loving of her sister, and their relationship is really, really strong.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was hoping. And I was hoping, like you said, that halfway through you start to almost suspect Zari because she's even the one who gives her the last
Yeah.
envelope. And so, did she mess with the letter? I was hoping people would start thinking, what if it was her? But you're right, there's such a love there. And later in their adult life, hopefully through actions, not words, but through actions, it comes through.
I think acts of services is like such an Asian love language.
It's so true. And the thing is, like, on the phone, there is no way they would be like, love you. They would not say that. Like, that just doesn't, happen, I think, for people like Roy and Sari, but it's there. It's totally there.
I also thought it was a little interesting because Batman had such a way with words, especially in his letter. Like that was something I did not expect. Well, like I wouldn't expect from like a stereotypical perspective of like Asian relationships because people don't really show love that way. Um, our next question is that so Roya's relationship with Walter is very, very different from her relationship with Batman. One is very passionate and like fiery in their youth, and the one is more like calm, stable. Was it intentional for you to contrast these two relationship dynamics? I think we would have had a very different story of like Walter's personality was so to Batman.
Yes, they're super different.
But,
Um, they're really different, and I think they come to her at different stages of her life. So maybe that super intense, energetic, passionate relationship when she's 17 is what she wants then. And also because it never continues, it's frozen in time in her mind. And Roya can idealize this person because she didn't end up with him. And Walter is very different. He's much more stable and steady. Dare I say, not really boring, but a little bit more predictable. And that's maybe what she really needs later in her life. I don't see the two men as, one is better than the other. I don't. I know readers sometimes do because I've visited book clubs where like there's been a fight over who's better. And in my opinion, I mean, I'm not even kidding you. This was when we were in person and people like left the table, left the room. They were disagreeing. It was like Team Walter versus Team Batman. But I think they're each wonderful in their own way. Each of one loves her. And guess what? She loves each one of them. And I do think you can love more than one person, even at the same time. So for her, these are the two men in her life, and they happen at different stages in her life. Very different men, but I don't think one is better than the other, personally.
I definitely agree. I thought it was very interesting how like her relationship with Bachman was like very fiery, passionate, and heated. And I thought that was kind of similar to like the political turmoil that was going on. And then also like Walter's relationship with her was like slow and steady. And that was like also the way her life was in America. Was that just a happy coincidence or was that intentional?
Not a coincidence. Absolutely intentional. I'm so glad you like caught up on. Sometimes, you, as an author, you do all these things and then you're like, is anyone going to notice? But yes, that was totally intentional because also if you think about it, with Batman, we're always with him and Roya in the summer, more or less, right? They meet in the winter, but the courtship, most of those scenes happen in the summer. And the Walter scenes, other than when they're very young and meeting and getting married, the later scenes are all in the winter. That was also intentional. And I even tried in my own way to subtly make the language different. When she's with Batman, the writing is a little bit more lush. And I don't know, I was thinking in Persian and translating into English. And when she's with Walter, it's very New England, America. So it's reflected in the language too, hopefully.
Now I'm really excited to reread. I'm not sure if this was clarified, but when Bachman and Roya finally meet at the end, is that in the summer or is that in the winter?
Good point. That is in the winter. Yes. That's kind of the only time we see them in the winter. So when they meet, it's in the winter, way, way back in Iran when he first comes into the stationery shop. But very soon it becomes spring, and they go through the first day of spring, Persian New Year, and then the rest of it is summer. But yes, at the end, it's the winter. Good point.
Okay, yeah, I'm really excited to reread now.
Yeah, even like the tone of the writing just felt very different when you're with Batman versus when you're with Walter.
Yeah, that was on my part intentional. So thank you for saying that.
Okay. Moving on to some sort of final things. For those who don't, For those who'd like to read more about Persian history, culture, and stories, do you have any book recommendations?
I do. I thought a lot about what I would recommend to readers, and so I have a smorgasbord, but this book has helped me a lot. It's helping me research for the next one too. This is called Iran, A Modern History, and it kind of summarizes thousands of years. Not that I expect anyone to read the whole thing, But if you're curious about a specific time period, it's pretty comprehensive. I think the book that I used a lot for 1953 and to learn about the events leading up to 1953 and what happened that day. All the Shah's Men. This is by Stephen Kinzer. It's by no means a perfect account of what happened, but boy, it reads like a spy thriller. I mean, Americans going to Iran with suitcases filled with dollars, literally. It's amazing. Like, truth is stranger than fiction. And then a great anthology of essays, poems, short stories. My Shadow is My Skin. So many great Iranian writers here, Iranian American, Iranian from the diaspora, just pretty comprehensive. And your book club members probably know Persepolis, but this graphic novel is kind of a classic. It's in comic book form. It's a graphic novel. She drew illustrations, but it's a great intro to the whole 1979 revolution that happened in Iran. And if you like YA, this is a great YA book. Darius the Great is Not Okay. Beautiful, beautiful book. Anyway, there's so many more that I could do, but I'll stop there.
I'm so excited to add all of those to my TBR and go through them.
They all sound so good.
Okay.
Oh, were you gonna say something?
Okay, I was gonna tie in because the first book you recommended, the first book you recommended, you said is helping you for your next book. So do you want to talk about what you're working on, your new projects?
Yes, so I'm working on the next book. So this would be my third novel. At the moment, it's called Third Novel. On my, laptop. Doesn't really have a title. It's such a good title, I know. Sometimes I jokingly call it Neglected because I keep neglecting it. But, with each book, I start longhand. So with the Stationery Shop, I had a specific notebook just for the Stationery Shop. And with this one, here we go, CVS, another notebook. And I start longhand. I could show you the Stationery Shop one. I just buy these, nothing special because I don't want to feel like it's precious. And here I do, in the first section, I have all these notes, things my dad told me, and then I write scenes longhand. So these are scenes that end up in the book. So I'm at that stage with the third book. It also takes place in Iran and in the US. And it also involves a lot of history. So once again, I have to educate myself, which is why I really love this book because it teaches me a lot about the different time periods. Yeah, so that's the third book so far.
It's so cool that you write it longhand. Is there a creative process that helps you? Is there a creative reason why it helps you more than just typing directly? I know most people now just start typing onto a Word doc.
Most people do. I do too. I mean, I do parts of it on the Word doc, but I think when you write longhand, there's a different thing that happens in your brain. This has been studied. First of all, it's slower than typing. When it's slower, by the time it goes from your brain down your arm through your hand, there's almost like an automatic self-editing that happens. I feel the writing becomes richer, and I just love the physicality of it. I love moving my hand across the page and having that kind of sound of the pen on the paper. There's a word I know for sounds that sound good, and I can't think of it. But, I wrote a book called The Stationery Shop, so I'm really into ink. I'm old school. I'm into fountain pens. I just like the, I don't know what the word is, the texture of it. And I thought I was alone. And then I read about how so many authors that we read do actually do a lot of their first draft longhand. So it made me feel less alone. And I think they do it for that quality that you get with the writing. Also, to be honest, it's less difficult to procrastinate when you do longhand. So you don't have to turn on the laptop, find the document, load, like wait for it to kind of load, and then find the cursor and all that. It's just, there's the notebook, there's the pen, there's less of an excuse, I think.
Yeah. The way you were describing writing it, it was almost like therapeutic. You were like
Yes.
hearing the sound of the pen scratching the paper and like the whole process. I feel like that's probably really helpful because like sometimes writing can probably be really intimidating and
Mm-hmm.
oh, I have so many thoughts in my head. Like I don't know where it's going.
Absolutely. It could be intimidating. And I think the using a pen on the paper also gives you a sense of control, but it's also really, really therapeutic, like you said. I know this is going to make me sound cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but it can also feel a bit like a workout. I mean, if you're writing by hand for an hour and then after you're done, like your hand is sore, I don't know, there's just something really satisfying from the physicality of it. Yeah, I highly recommend it. I always tell my writing students to try and put some of the longhand into their writing practice just to see what happens.
Yeah, you were describing it as a workout, and honestly, when you said like, "Oh, I like to write in longhand," my first response was, "Man, your wrist and your hand must be so strong." Because I used to journal pretty often. Like in the mornings, I tried to journal for like 30 minutes, and after 10 minutes, my hand would start cramping, and I have to just like shake it out and then keep going. And then I'm like, my wrist really is very weak. Kudos to
It's like any other like muscle, right? Like if you do it though, you get strong. So I can like go for an hour, no problem. Then I stop. But that in and of itself makes me feel good. Like just that movement gives me this sense of doing something more so than just typing on the laptop. Also, I think the cursor, we associate the printed word with perfection because usually once we read things, they're printed, and it can be more intimidating to have that cursor on the blank screen. I feel like on the page, you can make more mistakes. It's a little more forgiving.
Yeah. Okay. We'll definitely try to write more longhand whenever I do any type of writing. You did mention that the stationery shop took a really long time. So, do you know if your third book is there like a set maybe to release or how long it might take?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know my agent has the exact same question. And I'm being asked, like, I'm kind of under pressure. But the thing is, um, I can't rush these kinds of books, as you both know from reading The Stationery Shop. Like, in order to get to that level of hopefully emotion and catharsis, it's gonna take time. So let's just say I don't have a date. We'll see how long it takes. Hopefully it won't take too long, but it's almost like I can't control how long it takes.
We'll be patient.
Thank
Patiently
you.
waiting. Take your time. No pressure.
Thank you.
Um,
Here. Oh,
oh no.
sorry.
Okay.
Something that I'm really curious about is that are are all three of your books intertwined in some way? I know like there's a lot of political references, but do we have like character cameos? Are there any like hidden Easter eggs that if we read and like inspect we can find?
Oh my God, you are the first person who's asked me that question. I've done so many events and book club visits. No one has asked me. Thank you for asking me because there is, but no one has asked me. Yes, there are Easter eggs. So in Together Tea, I have a character who is I have to check, but like I think she's a housekeeper in the late 70s, early 80s. And then in the stationery shop, they have someone helping them in the 50s, and it's the same person in my mind. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure like you can connect the names. And in my opinion, the three books, Together Tea, The Stationery Shop, and Novel 3, are a trilogy. They are truly a trilogy, and there's certain patterns that occur in all three. So in The Stationery Shop, we have specific party scenes, wedding, um, same as in Together Tea, and so many parallels. I won't bore you, but yes, thank you for asking that. You're the very first person. But yes, the answer is they are all connected, deliberately so.
Well, that's so interesting because Together Tea is technically set after the Stationery Shop in terms of like timeline of events. Was there a reason why you like the Stationery Shop wasn't the first book you ended up writing, or why the other two was like came before it?
I think because Together Tea was more autobiographical, and a lot of first novels are autobiographical. It's almost as though, as a writer, you're not yet confident enough to tackle purely made up characters and events. And perhaps because as writers, that first book is getting a lot of things out of our system. So, like many first novels, Together Tea is autobiographical, and I got that over with, that out of my system. And so those events are based a lot on my own growing up years in childhood and going back to Iran and all of that. That's why that came first. But then with the second book, I felt confident to just be in a time and place that had absolutely nothing to do with me, that I could create entirely.
Now I'm
We're grateful for it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, okay. Um, okay, moving on to our last question. We went on a little bit of a tangent there.
Yeah.
What do you hope for your readers to get out of your stories, and do you have any last messages for your readers?
Ooh. You know what I love is when I get emails or messages from readers and they tell me that reading The Stationery Shop helped them achieve a sense of healing. So if through reading my books, if through reading the story of these characters, there's such a strong connection that they're moved and that they themselves feel a sense of healing, and as though they've gone through the entire journey with the characters in a very real emotional way, then that's what I hope people get out of reading my books. That means so much to me. This idea that I could sit here at this desk and write something, make stuff up in a very solitary situation. I'm very much alone when I do it. And then to have that connect with so many people that, I don't know all over the world really now, that's pretty miraculous to me. And that's really all I want from it. That's kind of asking a lot, but that would be the deal.
No. I think that's also what makes books and stories so magical because like you said, like when you are in the creative processes, it is a very solitary and almost like lonely activity because you're by yourself, you have your thoughts and you're just like putting them into words, and then when it gets published, it just goes out into the world and you don't know where it goes, and you don't know, like you could potentially make a huge impact on someone that you've never met across the globe, and it like forever changes their perspective of their life, and that's so wonderful, so beautiful.
Yeah, that's the power of it. And that's what's amazing about it. Yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
Okay, moving on to some fun questions. What is your most anticipated 2021 release?
Okay, well, I'm really excited about reading this 2021 release. I haven't read it yet. It came out quite recently. It's called Land of Big Numbers by Taiping Chen. It's actually a collection of short stories. And I've read a lot of novels during the pandemic, but I want to go back to my first love, which was short stories. It's about men and women in China and the whole Chinese diaspora within the context of contemporary China, which I find to me to be really interesting. I was in China in 2018, and it's a land of contradictions, and I would love to read this short story. So it comes highly recommended. It's called Land of Big Numbers.
It's such a pretty cover.
Yeah.
No, it's so pretty. It's so pretty. And honestly, like, if someone's not like maybe in the mood for a huge investment to read an entire novel, because it's a collection of short stories, I'm excited. Like, you could just read a story, you know, here and there, and still get so much out of it. That's why I also love short stories. So I'm excited about that one. Comes so highly recommended.
I know that we've been asking for a lot of book recommendations lately, but what is a book that you'd recommend to everybody? It doesn't have to be like this year, it can be just like a book that you cherish.
Okay, so there's a book I did my senior thesis on when I was a senior in college. And I feel like this book, I don't know why it just doesn't have more of a position in our mainstream book world. It's called No Boy. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's by John Okada. I would recommend getting the University of Washington Press edition, because I think Penguin came out with an edition without his estate allowing it. So there's a lot of controversy about that. But No Boy is about a man who returns basically from being imprisoned and being interned as a Japanese American, and he returns to his hometown, and he's called a no boy because he refused to say yes on those forms, right, to being loyal only to the US. And it's such a complex book. It's a nuanced book. I wrote my senior thesis on it, and even when I wrote my thesis, it wasn't well known, even though it was published. I think it was published in 1957. And I'm just always surprised that we don't talk about that part of our history so much. It's as though we just pretend it didn't happen. So highly recommend No Boy by John Okada. I wish it had more of a place in our consciousness because of the topic, especially.
I saw the moment Alexandra and I just like had the light bulb of understanding what our February book club pick was We Are Not Free by Tracy Chi, and that one also discusses Japanese internment. And so that was our first understanding of the survey.
Yeah, that's what it refers to, that survey. Yeah, that everybody had to fill out. Yeah.
I'm very excited. Thank you for all of the book recommendations. I'm like, okay, add to cart.
Yeah. But make sure you get the University of Washington edition, because his estate is really upset about the Penguin one, and I feel rightfully so. So.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite Asian food or favorite food in general?
You know I love food. If you read the Stationery Shop, you know I love food. I love
the cooking scene.
Yeah, the cooking scene. And I cook all the time. I love all Asian food. I guess, of course, when I was growing up, Chinese food, Japanese food was the Asian food I knew best. But I love Thai food. And my favorite dish, like my comfort dish, is bibimbap, which I just love. And of course, I make so much Persian food. So I love Persian food and I cook it all the time. But um, I want to kind of expand my repertoire a little bit. Uh, I guess in the pandemic, I've had more opportunity to cook than I would have wanted. But it's fun now to be able to go back out and have all these amazing foods. Yeah.
Do you have like a signature Persian dish you love making?
Yeah, the one I love to make is super time consuming and work intensive. So many Persian dishes take a lot of prep, but I do love to make it's a dish. It's in the book. It's the dish where Walter proposes to Roya when they're having it. It's called Orme Sabzi, and it's like a dish made with a lot of parsley and cilantro, and I have to get all the herbs right, otherwise my mom will get angry. Green onions, like scallions, and red kidney beans. It's very fragrant. That's one I make a lot, which I don't know why I make it a lot because it's so time consuming, but I do enjoy it. However, the Instant Pot has helped make it more manageable.
Yeah. All the cooking scenes made me be like, man, I just wish I can go to the nearest Persian restaurant right now and get all the food.
I hear that a lot, but I think you're in LA, right? So you have access to really good Persian food. I
Yeah.
feel more so than other parts of the US.
Time to go exploring.
Yeah, time to go
Shopping.
to, I think is it Westwood? Where all the, I should know where the Iranian restaurants are. I think it's Westwood. Westwood? Yeah.
Okay. Those are all of the questions that we had prepared. Yay! Thank you so much, Marjan, for joining us in our live show discussion. Next month, we are reading Dial A for Aunties. So if you're in our book club and you want to join us, be sure to join us on Discord, on Facebook, on Instagram, all of our other socials so we can discuss that. And we're so happy we read The Stationery Shop this month. It was so good.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your amazing questions. This was such a great, thorough discussion, and you asked questions that have never been asked, so I really appreciate that especially. Thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you for all the gift boxes you're making and everything you're doing. It means so much, I think, to so many people. Thank you.
Thank you. Really, 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 really happy to hear that. And I think that's all. So we'll see you next
Go
time.
read it if you haven't.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I say like if you haven't read, but then again, this whole is supposed to be spoilers. So it's like if you're here, then you should have read it. Well, now you should reread it and then read her other books so you can see all of the
Easter
underlying
eggs.
characters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.